If you're in market and you're looking to upgrade your car, I'm sure a lot of us have felt the same way. A luxury car, a luxury performance car, while it might be nice to have, is just a little bit too out of reach. It might be too expensive to maintain, parts might be too expensive, it's too complicated to work on. Well, in this video, while I was going to focus mostly on replacing the rotors and pads on this RS5, I also wanted to sort of debunk the assumptions around, is it really that expensive to own a secondhand luxury car or luxury performance car? So, hey everybody, and welcome to WhyBuy. Let's jump in. Well, the moment's finally here. I bought the car with 28,000 kilometers, and we're at 99,999 kilometers. Oh, just let's live here forever. Oh, 100,000 kilometers. And what a beautiful day it is. So let's start with the Audi Q5, seeing as how this was one of the best-selling luxury SUVs on the market. At the high end, the B9.5 generation SQ5 is your top-of-the-line performance model, or higher end for running cost, depending on how you want to look at it. Produced from 2019 to 2024, what really sets this car apart from the base Q5 is the engine. You'll find the same V6 in cars like the Audi S4 and the Audi S5. And on the used market, in good condition, you're likely to find one for around $42,000, which is pretty good considering they were around $72,000 new. As far as brake rotor costs, if you want factory OEM rotors from SHW, you're looking at $350 to $405 per rotor. So that's the SQ5, the performance model, but what about the base luxury model? So let's say you want to sacrifice the power and performance, you just want luxury. Well, the same generation Q5 can be found on the used market for roughly 30 grand. And that's a pretty good deal for a $50,000 SUV. As far as the base Q5 rotors, I was actually surprised. The OEM spec rotor was about 380 bucks. So this is kind of a unique case where the base model Q5 is actually got more expensive rotors than the highest end SQ5. So it's not the best example. Let's see what's next. That's more like it, the RS3. This little sleeper has become something of a legend in the car world. $63,000 new might sound like a lot for a small sedan, but this thing is an absolute monster in the tuning world. Even stock, it has one of the best engines ever made. A beautiful 5-cylinder engine that pumps out nearly 400 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. On the used market, if you can find one in good shape that hasn't been tuned to death, you could probably pick one up for around 48,000 bucks. Also, if you want to know what it's like to modify and daily drive, I highly suggest you watch our episode dedicated to the RS3. As for the OEM rotors, well, these bad boys are going to set you back anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500 a piece for the front rotors. But that should tell you just how fast this little car can go. Plus, if you ever do decide to unleash more power in aftermarket tunes, it's nice to know that it comes with brakes already that can stop you. Now, for comparison, let's take the base model A3, which in many ways is like a VW Golf. New, they were about 33 grand, but used, you could probably find one for 22,000 bucks. And as for the rotors, this is a better example of what I'm talking about. Instead of $1,300 for just one front rotor, the OEM A3 rotor is only about 195 bucks. But what if we go higher up the food chain? A bigger, full-size sedan. To kick things off, I want to give you guys a bit of a reality check of what it's like to actually own an RS car. The prestige, the performance, is it really worth the money? Now, the great thing about luxury cars and luxury performance cars is that as soon as they drive off the lot from when they're new, they depreciate considerably. And that's mostly due to the used market not having as high of a demand. So yeah, for this car being new around 100 grand, you could probably find it used for 50 or 40, maybe even $30,000 with low mileage. But the fear that really comes with that is, well, if I'm buying this car used, what is it really going to cost to own in terms of servicing, in terms of maintenance? What if anything breaks on it that I have to replace? So that day finally came, and get ready for this, because to replace the rotors and pads on the RS5, just for parts alone, you're looking at about anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000. Let that sink in. And if you think the hardware costs are a little bit steep, it's not even accounting for the labor. And if you're thinking, oh, I'll just do the labor myself, well, I'll get to that later in the episode, but it's not as easy as you think. Now, granted, the RS5 is designed more so for racing rather than grocery getter, and it's not really a fair comparison for luxury cars. There is a big difference between an RS or an S or an A5. You have to remember that luxury cars aren't performance luxury cars. I think a lot of people get freaked out when they hear about the maintenance costs or repair parts for the AMG M or RS cars from these manufacturers, where it's like, well, that's ridiculous. That's like 5-6 times the price of a Ford or a Dodge. Well, the reality is that these are track-focused cars. The Audi RS5. This car probably surprised me the most in recent years. While the B9 generation is very different from the B8, it's actually similarly priced to when the B8 was new, about 95,000 bucks. However, it lost that beautiful V8 in exchange for a more eco-friendly twin-turbo V6. Still, the extra 100 pound-feet of torque in this car make a massive difference over the V8. And in good condition on the used market, this is a fast, nimble car for $50,000. Plus, if you need 4 doors and cargo space, that's another benefit over the old B8 model. But what about the brakes? While they don't look as cool as the previous generation, they still have all the benefits, and they actually cost less, about $850 to $1,100 per front rotor. And going back to the argument of luxury cars aren't the same as performance luxury cars, the base luxury model A5, which you could probably find used today for $28,000, its front rotors are only $350 a piece. I also want to point out that I'm not digging into the S5 or S models for these cars, but for a little context, let's say you didn't want the base model or the RS model, the S5 brake rotors will run you about $400. So it's not quite split down the middle, but it's a fair compromise if you still want a luxury car with some performance. Oh, man, that car sounds good. So what about the big dogs? Those dream RS cars we all wish we could buy? Well, if you had 137 grand lying around, you could buy one new. And I'd say that's a very sensible choice if you need a family car or a do-anything car. The Audi RS6 is probably more famous than the Audi R8. Never mind the fact that it has a nearly 600 horsepower V8 under the hood. It's a wagon. It's the wagon, the ultimate sleeper car. Even used, you're lucky if you can get one for less than 120 grand. And as for the brakes, God help you if you buy one with the carbon ceramic option. These trip to Hawaii rotors cost around $7,000 a piece just for one front rotor. But don't worry, they last a very, very long time. Seriously, they will last the life of the car if you don't track it too much. And it's sort of worth it if you consider, you get good mileage out of them. The good news is Audi does let you option the car with steel performance brake rotors instead, which are much more sensible at around $1,100 to $2,100 a piece. But let's say the RS6 is just too much ham for you. You just want a nice wagon and something that's a little bit more practical. No problem. The base luxury model, the A6 Avant, you can likely find these used for around $44,000. And it has much more sensible pricing when it comes to the rotors, costing only 250 Canadian dollars. Oh, and have you ever seen a four-wheel drive burnout? Here's a little treat for you RS6 fans out there. So yes, most of us couldn't run out and buy this beauty. Never mind the cost of replacing the brakes. But for all its glory and prestige, there is an honorable mention I'd like to include. The original granddaddy C5 RS6. While this badass was never sold in Canada in Avant form, Avant is Audi speak for wagon, by the way, I'm seeing more import C5s at car meets, which is a wonderful thing to see. We actually filmed a C5 RS6 episode a few years back, and I gotta say, this car still looks phenomenal. It was 84 grand when it was new, and even used, it's holding its value between 35 to 45 grand. The engine is powerful, the space is usable, it's a great car. And as for the OEM brake rotors, about 500 to 800 a piece. I'm actually surprised you can still get them. Now, when you look at the base model, not that you're going to probably go out and buy one, but the good news is they usually go for around 2,000 bucks. That's not the rotor, that's the car. The rotors are only 180 bucks a piece. And by the way, if you don't get the whole wagon thing and why people love wagons, just look at the new one. That's how a lot of us hardcore fans still feel about these ones. Speaking of honorable mentions, the cousin to the RS6 is still very much a menacing sleeper car. The C7 generation of the Audi RS7 is perfect if wagons aren't your thing. I remember the first time I saw an A7 Sportback and was like, damn, that's a good looking car. And on top of that, it has the same engine as the RS6, same performance benefits, but on the used market, you can find them in good shape for around 80 grand. Yes, they came out earlier, so these RS7s are a little older, but the overall package you get for the money is an awesome buy if you can afford it. As far as the rotors go, while they look similar to my car, these rotors are actually a bit bigger, and strangely enough, they're about the same price. At about 1,100 bucks, they are expensive, but this is a big, fast, and heavy car to stop. Now, the A7 base luxury model, which you can find used for about 20 grand today, it has big brakes too. So they're expensive, but they're a little bit more sensible at around $544 per rotor. This all goes back to my point. Also, keep in mind, the prices I'm sharing with you, they might change or vary depending on when and where you buy them. Plus, I'm basing this on what I could find online for OEM pricing. That's why I give ranges and approximate pricing. I'm also leaving out aftermarket rotor options, which are usually less expensive, but that'll have to be for another video. So that's Audi, but what about other luxury brands that you might be contemplating? Let's say like Lexus, Mercedes, BMW, are they in the same camp here? The Lexus GS is about $370 per front rotor. That's their entry-level luxury model. Or even the BMW 4 Series, you're looking at $560 per front rotor versus the M4, which is about $700 per front rotor. Or take, for example, the Mercedes E-Class. You're looking at 360 bucks per front rotor, whereas the E63 AMG, the performance variant's about $1,600. So it's a big difference between a luxury car versus a performance luxury car. But what about other brands? The difference isn't as dramatic as you might think. The Honda Accord, 175 bucks per front rotor. The Toyota Camry, 141. The Ford Fusion, which I don't even think they make anymore, was $170. And the Chevy Malibu, $180 per front rotor. Now, I'm not going to go into every single part and replacement component that you might come across during the ownership of these cars, but I just wanted to give an example that despite the fact that these luxury brands might seem like they're much more expensive to own, the reality is, oh, there's a BMW. It's a cool bike. The pistons are like they go like this and it's super weird. But anyways, besides the point. The point is that I think people always assume that domestic brands are going to be less expensive to own, or even the Japanese brands are going to be less expensive to own. But when you compare the difference between the luxury brands, the cost gap isn't really that big. You're paying maybe $100 difference on average to get a better quality product and a better driving experience. So if you are someone who is contemplating getting an AMG or an M or an RS or an F Sport variant from these manufacturers, you're probably asking yourself, why is there such a huge jump? Or like the Audi Club always likes to call it, the RS tax. The truth is that more horsepower and torque doesn't just come alone in these vehicles. There's a lot of modifications to the suspension, to the brakes, practically everything to make it not just a exhilarating experience that'll blow your hair back, but also safe. When you think about these badges, what they mean, in a nutshell, it's the best technology that these brands have to offer. Putting it in these cars is like getting a taste of racing heritage and performance while still having the creature comforts and luxuries that you would get in the luxury models. Comfortable seating, good sound systems, yet it's still wrapped up in a package that you could go to the track and have some real fun. So not only are the performance variants of these cars more limited in their production, it also means they can't achieve economies of scale. So when they do decide to make a carbon fiber engine cover or a specific style of brake, rotor, and caliper design, compared to say like the A5, which I think is about 120,000 units for the same model year versus the 1,400 of the RS5, they're not going to be mass producing all of these components. So unless it's shared with the base model car, all of this stuff is unique and special. And in fact, that's why these cars are so special. The RS, the AMGs, the M, the F Sports, you're getting something that is not exclusive for the sake of being exclusive, but it's just reserved for a very small buying segment because you really do have to be crazy to buy one of these cars. Getting back to the example for this episode, we're really going to be focusing on stopping power. Now, the RS5 has, in my opinion, the best looking brakes out of any production car I've ever seen in my life. They are stunning to look at. They're cross-drilled, they're waved, scalloped, and they're floating with an aluminum hat. It literally looks like a watch. It's not only a beautiful design, but it's functional as well. And when I looked at replacing these brakes, the first thought that came to my head was, well, I really want to replace them, not with an aftermarket option or some other variant from Audi. I want these brakes again. The most important aspect when it comes to brakes is temperature management. And when I mentioned earlier all about the cross drill, the scalloped wave design, and why it's a floating disc, all of this is in an effort to help manage temperatures. So they have to do a really good job of not just slowing the car down quickly, but they also have to do a good job of cooling off immediately after so that the next time you go to brake, they're going to be ready and you won't be flying off the road.
He's got brake fade. The brakes.
First off, I went to the Audi dealership and said that my rotors are getting to the point where I think they need to be replaced. How much are they? How long does it take to get them? And what's funny is, even though the part number is the same for the replacement rotors on the B8.5 RS5, they're not the same rotors. In fact, they're these hideous, no design, no flair, no nothing to them. They look so basic. And I looked at the price and they're the same price as these original scalloped rotor designs. how come I can't get the original ones that came on the car? SHW is, I think, under contract not to be able to sell these rotors outside of an Audi dealership. Think of SHW like Brembo. They're both specialty manufacturers in unique components for performance cars. It doesn't make sense for the manufacturer like Audi to make these specialty calipers in-house like the Brembo calipers or these specialty rotors from SHW. But if you can't get them from Audi anymore and you can't order them directly from SHW, how do you get your hands on them? Unfortunately, the only way to get them now, 10 years later after the car came out, is you have to find a distributor who still has them on the shelf. And this is something that really worried me because even when comparing the price of these rotors, say to the new Audi ones that I didn't like the way they looked, or an aftermarket variation, I didn't want those. I wanted these specific SHW rotors, and I looked all over the place and just couldn't find them. I even had to call in a few favors from different people I know to see if they could call maybe a warehouse or some distributor that I wasn't aware of to see if they had it on the shelf. And what's funny is I finally found a set going through Motion Auto, and I sort of slept on the idea, and I'll get to that in a minute as to why. And I said, oh, I'll just get them later. And then about a year down the road, when I went to check again, they weren't available. So I got really, really lucky, and I found a set from Eurosport Tuning and ordered them right away. And I knew when I got them finally that it was going to be something special. So I even did an unboxing video. So what makes SHW so special? Well, SHW is an OEM supplier for companies like Audi, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Lamborghini. The other thing is that all SHW rotors are manufactured in Germany using the same in-house casting and machining, unlike many of the competitors who might outsource to third parties or overseas foundries. SHW controls the entire process. And so SHW rotors, they do come with perfect fitment. So there's no spacers, there's no guessing. These match OE specs, which is critical for, systems like Audi's Quattro or BMW's DSC stability control. And they also use high carbon cast iron in every disc. So when you think about brake noise or improving thermal stability, this is what helps resist that kind of warping. And if you think about standard cast iron rotors that many of the competitors use, that's why over time they start to squeal like crazy. The other thing that you've probably noticed by now is the two-piece pin drive design that's patented. So this lightweight design also helps reduce unsprung weight. So this more or less helps each axle shed probably about 5 pounds. So it does improve the suspension response. And it's just something, the benefits that you'd get from forged wheels or lighter calipers, you're getting in your brake rotors. And compared to one-piece designs, the SHW rotors can expand and contract without cracking under repeated thermal stress, which is really key in performance driving. Like if you see cheap cross-drilled rotors that crack in between the holes, well, that's because they're cheap. They're not SHW. So the big change, like you probably saw earlier, was that SHW Performance now sells to the aftermarket. So previously, to get these, you'd have to order them through the dealership, but I think in 2020, they started offering direct access to their motorsport grade parts. The other thing, SHW makes rotors for cars that push over 600 horsepower from the factory, and they have to be battle tested in order to be put on the cars so that they can be sold right from Audi or BMW or Mercedes or whatever. You're basically getting the only rotors that are genuinely tested under these harsh conditions. And unlike some aftermarket designs which may just look sporty for the sake of looking sporty, SHW actually matches the slot and drill patterns to each vehicle's brake bias and thermal characteristics. So you're getting a brake rotor that's meant for the car. And that pretty much sums up SHW. Not only are they gorgeous rotors, but they're probably the best ones that are meant for your car. But I want to back up a little bit, because even before I ordered the rotors, you're probably asking yourself, well, if my brake pads are worn out, if the little sensor goes off and it tells you you need to replace your brake pads, do you need to replace your rotors at the exact same time? Normally, yes. The manufacturers like Audi or BMW, they'll recommend when you replace the rotors, you replace the pads, or vice versa. They both go at the same time. Now, I didn't have the money at the time to replace the rotors when I needed to replace my brake pads. So again, I took it to Motion Auto, we put it up on the lift, we took the wheels off, and we had to look around and said, you know what? These rotors can probably last another year or two before I have to replace them. We can just order new pads, put them on for now, which will save me a bit of money in the short term, and then I'll just put new rotors on down the road. Now, you have to be very careful when you do this. It's very important that when you're gonna be reusing your rotors with new pads, that you do a good inspection on the rotor surface. There's a lot of giveaways that will tell you if the rotor is shot. For one, look for scoring. So when the rotors get down to the point where the metal's to that very base layer and it heats up way too much, it'll actually go brownish black. It won't have a mating surface anymore for the pad to grip onto. You're basically running on a last leg. You might be even in danger of cracking the rotor. Speaking of which, with these cross drill designs, I heard a lot of people complaining, well, the cross drill design, it doesn't really do much for cooling, and when the brakes get too hot, cold, they can actually fracture in between the lines. Luckily, my car never had that issue, but that's another thing to inspect. The most important thing, if you're looking at continuing to use your rotors, is a digital micrometer or a set of calipers where you can actually measure the thickness of the rotor. Now, this is something I did regularly towards the end of the life of these rotors, and the reason why it's important is because from factory, these rotors only come with a very limited amount of wear before the rotor needs to be replaced. Specifically, I think on the SHW rotors, you have about 2 or 2.5 millimeters of wear before the rotor is toast. 2.5 millimeters. Doesn't sound like a lot, but keep in mind, I've had these rotors for over 90,000 kilometers, and despite that wear thickness only being like such a tight tolerance, it has held up. Now, if the wear point is, let's say, below that threshold, the last thing you want is one of these rotors exploding, let's say on a nice, beautiful road trip, and now you're down and you have no brakes. So anyways, if you are using your rotors in the long run, you can, but there are some risks associated. So let's talk about the pads. Brake pads may look simple, but their material and build quality have a big impact on how safely and how quietly your car stops. Now, when you shop for pads, most pads are made from one of 3 main compounds. Organic pads are quiet and gentle on the rotors, so even though they wear faster and can fade under heavy braking, they're usually best for commuter cars and not so much performance driving because they're not that expensive and they're relatively quiet. Now, semi-metallic pads mix metal fibers with resin, which offer better stopping power, and they handle heat very well. The only issue is that they can create a little bit more brake dust and noise, which can get pretty annoying. So when you see a performance car and it's got squeaky brakes or the wheels look super dusty, that's why. Ceramic pads, on the other hand, are long-lasting, quiet, and they typically resist heat and corrosion the best. Though they cost more and you usually have to heat them up a little bit before they actually work their best, they're usually the best kind of higher end option. If you're wondering what that little cable hanging off the brake pad is, that's the wear sensor. So in Audis and most luxury cars, instead of those metal scrapers that squeal when your pads are toast, the wear sensor basically breaks and then tells the car's computer that your brake pads need to be replaced. They're about 15 bucks if you ever have to replace them, by the way. Now, the prices on pads are kind of all over the place when you go to shop. And believe me, quality matters. High quality pads hold their shape under extreme heat. That means you get consistent friction, whereas lower grade pads tend to glaze over and even crumble, which is gonna reduce your stopping power and increase wear on your rotors. If you don't believe me, look for the video on testing brake pads from the Engineering Explained channel. They did an outstanding job testing all the different types of cheap, mid-grade, and high-grade pads, and it's worth checking out. Now, in terms of performance factors, better compounds give more bite and shorter stopping distances. Also, high-quality pads maintain performance even when you're going down steep hills and repeated abuse. It's just a better option for your car. Another good reason to get good quality pads is they typically include coatings or shims that prevent rust on the hardware or backing plates. Lastly, the noise control. Premium pads use chamfers, slots, and sound dampening shims to reduce squeals and vibration. So even those performance pads like the semi-metallic or ceramics, which can get squeaky, these premium pads do a significant job in reducing the noise. For the RS5, I highly recommend you go OEM or OEM equivalent. You'll get more life out of the brake rotors, less noise, and the best stopping power. If you put on a brand new set of pads on the old rotors, those pads are going to bed in with the grooves and wear of the old surface of the rotor. My concern was, well, if these brand new pads that I'm putting on, if they're being seated to this, old rotor surface, am I going to be able to use the pads later when I replace the rotors? The answer is yes. If the rotor surface, the old rotor, isn't that bad, and the pad surface doesn't look too uneven, you can reuse the brake pads. In fact, that's what I did. And the nice thing is, so long as you do the bedding process right after you replace them, they should mate up perfectly with the new rotor. Now, again, a lot of variable moving parts here. The best course of action, like the manufacturers suggest, just replace the rotors and the pads at the same time. But if you're on a budget, that can get very expensive. So at the end of the day, even though I bought myself a little bit of time to be able to save up to buy the rotors, I still ended up having to buy the rotors anyways. So the reality is that whether you like it or not, you're gonna have to spend this money. And I realize that on the aftermarket side of things, there are other manufacturers you can buy brake rotors from. For example, I looked at some from, I think, ECS Tuning, which I like the design. It's similar. It's not quite as nice as the SHW rotors, but the cost difference was like $300. And if I'm already spending this much money, I might as well get the ones that I want. My point is, there are ways you can sort of save costs here and there. And that kind of brings me into my next point, was trying to change the rotors myself. So the first thing I did was I started trying to find YouTube videos and whatever resources I could to prepare to do the job. And what's funny is most of the videos that I could find on the RS5 or the B8, B8.5 generation cars, it was mostly on the rear. No one ever did the fronts. So I wasn't really sure if it was going to be as easy or as difficult, but I figured I'd give it a try anyways. So what do you really need to know for this job? Instead of doing a how-to video, I'm just going to preface this by saying the labor all in is probably going to run you $600 to $800 to have a shop or an Audi dealership replace all the rotors and pads instead of you having to do the work. And I highly, highly recommend that you do that, because the amount of work, time, and effort and sweat that's going to go into doing the job yourself, never mind the specialty tools you need, it's an absolute nightmare. But let me walk you through a little bit of the process and my attempt. That engine. If you are thinking, well, how much hardware is there to replace? Just remember that the only necessary bolts that you have to replace are the caliper carrying bolts. So the caliper carrying bolts are essentially stretch bolts or torque to yield bolts. So that means once you put them in and torque them to spec, once they're stretched, you can't reuse them. Essentially, if you go to reuse them, any additional force or that additional torque could snap the bolt, and then you'd have a rotor caliper flying around inside your wheel well, and it could be a terrible accident. So what I found interesting is that the rear caliper carrying bolts can actually stay in place. You don't need to replace them because the rotor is small enough to slide past the caliper. All you need to do is remove the set screw, and you'll find that the rotor, with a little bit of tapping, once you get it loose, it can slide right out and you can replace it with the new one. The fronts, on the other hand, you do have to remove the caliper carrying bolts. And this is an area where I kind of got stuck because having the car lifted like I did, not being underneath it to get a pry bar or a breaker bar, those bolts I think are torqued to about 160, 170 foot-pounds. So with the wrenches that we had and the driver only being 1/4 inch, there was no way we were going to be able to remove it. So essentially I threw in the towel after I did the rears. And I'm not joking when I say it took me about 7 hours just to do the rears. The rears have an electronic parking brake. Now, really quick to run you through the electronic parking brake procedure. First, you actually have to hook up the battery to a trickle charger, because to engage the service mode for the parking brake, that consistent amperage or draw on the battery, if it's inconsistent, you can burn out the actuator. So when you hook up the battery to a trickle charger, then you're not at risk of damaging the actuator. Again, these are little things that if you don't know, you could cause additional damage, additional costs that you weren't expecting. The other thing that was kind of a pain was the fact that to remove the rotors and the pads, it's so tight, and everything is kind of designed in a way where there isn't a lot of wiggle room. So if you're trying to remove the caliper, let's say, to free up the rotor, even to pull the caliper back out of the way, there's a lot of little clips for the brake lines that you have to make sure that you remove, because the last thing you want to do is damage the brake line and have brake fluid all over the place. But anyways, so this is a lot easier if you have experience, but if you don't have experience doing it, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. And like I said, we worked until, 11:30, 12 at night. This is the realities. This is what Audi wants when you say, I'm going to change my brakes myself. Ha ha, 9. Hey everybody, welcome to WhyBuy. I hate my life. There's a spring. I have to show people the truth of the other side. I didn't film it because I thought it would be easy. That was a lie. It was not easy. But the rears are done, so that's an achievement. I'm going to take that. So now gotta put the wheels on, lower the car, put the brake fluid back in. I don't think I filmed that part, but brake fluid, there it is. Hello, brake fluid. Oh, focus up, whatever. Brake fluid back in, take it out of the service position for the parking brake, and then I will go and find some way to cry myself to sleep. And at that point, I was running out of time, so I ended up taking, for the fronts, to Motion Auto, where things got a little bit more interesting. Oh yeah.
Up the sides there and stuff.
Yeah, I can see it. Looks like little wrinkles in there.
And then these are the ones that cause that in the wheel well. Yeah, the uppers are definitely split all the way around too.
I just want to say that the guys at Motion Auto are always easy to deal with. They're always fair with their pricing, they're very accommodating with the schedule, and they're very upfront in educating you about why they're doing the work they're doing and why it costs that it does. Moreover, they're able to get parts at very competitive pricing. So when you think about going to a dealership or another shop, Motion Auto is a really good one-stop shop to get the work done, and they can also source the parts more competitively than I could find online. So anyways, I took it to the guys at Motion Auto, and I was in a bit of a time crunch, and luckily, very short notice, they were able to squeeze me in and do the front rotors. But once we had it up on the lift, this is where we discovered the next problem. So first off, I'm going to preface this with the fact that there is an engineering flaw, or rather a common issue with Audis that have the traditional Quattro system. So because the transmission in the original Quattro has this big drive shaft that goes to the front wheels, the weight of that transmission unit plus the longitudinally mounted engine, it puts a lot of strain on the front end. even though it's a very sophisticated suspension system, the double wishbone, so you have 2 control arms at the top of the wheel and 2 control arms at the bottom, the bushings that hold those control arms in place take a lot of repeated abuse and strain. And after about 100,000 kilometers, mine started to show wear. Now, I didn't hear any clunking, there weren't any issues, but I knew from when I removed the wheel, I saw these kinds of wrinkles or stress marks. And even though the fluid hadn't come out of those bushings, I had a suspicion that it was probably time to replace them. So this was confirmed when I took it to Motion Auto. They looked at it and said, look, if we don't replace these right now, they pointed out to me which ones were broken, like, you're going to have issues, especially if you're going on a long road trip and you're trying to enjoy the drive. The last thing you want is to hear clunking or this kind of vibration coming from the wheels. And even though it sounds like bad timing and, oh, how unfortunate that this happened while I'm doing my rotors, this was a benefit, because had I not replaced the upper and lower control arms with brand new rotors on the wheels, it's likely that that added give and vibration would have warped the rotor. So add another additional cost to rebuy the rotors and then the control arms. So again, not what I wanted right before I went on a road trip, but it was sort of good timing. So I spoke with Jeff. He's the guy who owns and runs Motion Auto, and he told me that, look, I can pull a couple of guys off and we can sort of do an emergency work job on your car to get it out today. And I also have the parts available. We can try and do this job really quickly. So they were extremely helpful, and I give them a lot of credit, and mostly because I've seen people replace the upper control arm assembly, and there's this pinch bolt that holds it together that has a bad tendency to get seized. The only way to take it off is using a blowtorch. So again, I give the guys in the shop a lot of credit, because they essentially dropped what they were doing to help me out so that I could get out of there by the end of the day. And not only were they able to get the work done, but they were able to do it within 4.5 hours, which is really impressive. So anyways, back to the brake rotors. So yeah, the brake rotors were replaced. I reused the old pads, and similar to what I was talking about before, you can reuse old pads if they're not that worn down or if they aren't that badly grooved. Essentially, you just have to go through a bedding procedure right after you get the new pads on, so that those grooves aren't wearing into the new rotors more than the rotors are wearing into the brake pads. So people who buy RS cars or AMG cars or M cars or F Sport, when they complain and moan and groan about the price of parts and labor, the maintenance costs of owning these vehicles, these cars are in a completely different category. They're more track focused, very tight tolerances, versus luxury cars. The premium that you're paying for is just high quality finished materials and packaging and a bit better engineering. And like I said earlier in the video, the difference in parts in terms of cost compared to like an economy brand, whether you're buying a Ford, GM, or even a Kia or Hyundai product, the difference isn't that great to make a leap to a luxury product. Yes, there are downsides in terms of the complexity of working on these cars yourself. Namely, it's the specialty tools that you have to buy to be able to work on the car. They're deliberately engineered to be complicated so that you go to the dealership. And I know this is super frustrating, but like any piece of machinery or car that you buy, you just have to be prepared to do the work if you're going to work on it yourself. Otherwise, take it to someone who knows what they're doing. It'll be worth the hassle-free and no headaches, trust me. You got to remember, this car is 10 years old now. It's a 2015, and when you think about owning a car like this that's this old, maintaining it, is it actually worth it? The answer is yes. The nice thing about owning a car from this generation is that it doesn't have a lot of tech guff. There's not a lot of, haptic controls or touchscreens in it. It's very much a driver-focused experience, and that's probably the best part right now about the 2015 to 2018 era of cars, is that the depreciation has hit them so hard that you can pick them up relatively inexpensively, and you can still enjoy what was really great about owning these cars, which was a driving experience, a great engine. And when you look at things like the brakes and the performance of the vehicle, it's absolutely worth it if you want to have that thrill of a luxury performance car. But this isn't to say that a luxury car wouldn't be fun to own as well. the difference is that, again, when you pay the extra amount of money for that RS badge or the AMG badge or the F Sport badge or the M badge, what you're really getting a piece of is a race car mixed with a luxury car, so that you can kind of have the best of both worlds. But yeah, in my experience, having had the car now for a number of years, this was the thing I was dreading the most, was having to replace the brakes and rotors, because I knew they would come up and I knew that they would be expensive. Oh, they're expensive. Brace yourself for that one. Tires and brakes, when they come and they're due, like, meanwhile, like, in the back of my mind, I'm still worried about, you know, this O2 sensor, which may or may not be an easy fix, and my brake pads, which, if you don't know, like on an RS5, I'll get to that in the next episode. But if I'm being completely honest, even though they're pricey, they've lasted 100,000 kilometers, which is insane. From factory to have rotors and pads last almost that duration of time, even though they're expensive, the frequency at which I'm replacing them is a lot lower. So in closing out this episode, I just want to say that if you are on the fence, or if you are looking at a luxury car or a luxury performance car, just set aside a budget for the maintenance and parts items that are going to come up. Things like rotors, things like brake pads, or even the upper and lower control arms. These instances, when they do come up, can sort of tarnish the experience. You might only have, let's say, $30,000 or $40,000 to buy the vehicle, but if you have nothing budgeted for replacement parts and the car has 90, 100,000 kilometers, it's going to be a bit of a sticker shock. But the one thing I'll say from my experience is that if you can budget for it, if you plan for it, it is absolutely worth it. Because when you think about the time and money investment to buy one of these vehicles, if you're already spending $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, and it's a difference of about $5,000 or $8,000 to get a better product that's better engineered and has essentially better performance or better luxury, a better overall package, it's worth the money if you value driving and if you value the vehicle that you drive. So all in all, I'd say it's worth it, but you have to be prepared for it. Nothing's cheap, nothing comes easy, but thankfully there's a lot of aftermarket solutions. There's a lot of aftermarket supports in terms of shops that do aftermarket work, like Motion Auto. And the other thing too, there's great communities out there of people posting YouTube videos, or they're on forums. You can really self-educate if you want to try and tackle all of this work yourself. But otherwise, I hope you thought this video was helpful. Please like and subscribe, show your support, and thanks for watching. You thought I forgot about this one, didn't you? The Audi R8, the one, the only, the Iron Man car. It's actually not much more expensive than the RS6, but let's be real here. Apples and oranges, wagons and supercars, V8s and V10s. Funny enough, when you look into the parts on the R8, there is a reason why people refer to this car as sensible and a good daily driver for a supercar. Okay, so the carbon brake rotors are $10,000 each. Ouch. But overall, the R8 isn't that far from my RS5. Let me explain. The non-ceramic options for the R8 brakes are in fact the same as the ones on my RS5. The only difference is that the rear rotors are smaller than the fronts for my car, but on the R8, they are the big ones all the way around. In addition to the brakes being very similar, don't forget that the very first generation Audi R8 was powered by a high-revving, naturally aspirated V8. In fact, the big difference between my RS5 and the Gen 1 R8's engine is that the V8 in my car produces more horsepower. Anyways, if you're on a budget and you really love the Audi R8, consider finding a Gen 1. It's not the V10, but you could probably pick one up for 80 grand in good shape. What's more, some Gen 1 R8s are fairly mild out, and if you're willing to take the risk, you could probably have a little fun and pick one up for about 60 grand. Okay, I've said it before in the Quattro documentary, if you like the Audi R8, you have to look at the TTRS. The most recent TTRS, the Mark III, is a very usable sports car. In many ways, the overall package is a better bet than the R8. If you don't believe me, watch the full episode on it. I guarantee you'll be surprised. The TTRS uses the same 5-cylinder masterpiece engine as the RS3, but with a little bit different styling and overall packaging. It's a two-door, and as far as sports cars go, it has an incredible amount of storage and comfort for long road trips. The rotors are expensive, but not crazy. And no, the stock TTRS doesn't look like this jaw-dropping example you're seeing here, but it's still a very beautiful car. And while it's not an R8, in the real world, I think it fits a bit better, especially with day-to-day driving. For a more sensible option, the TTS model is something you might want to consider. The used price for these is usually around 30,000 bucks, not 60. And no, it doesn't have the engine, it doesn't have the performance benefits of the TTRS, but again, the S models do offer that compromise. And the rotors will only set you back about 250 bucks per front rotor. Again, the prices I'm sharing with you aren't 100% accurate. The whole point of showing these differences between performance luxury cars and just luxury cars is to show you that basic stuff like brake rotors, that should give you an idea as to what you're getting into. So if you are really lusting after that RS AMG F Sport badge, you may want to think twice, because you get what you pay for, but it does come at a price. But yes, every Audi RS owner I've ever talked to says they're worth it. And believe me, it's worth it. What? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Well done, sir. I gotta hand it to you. This is so good. No way! Oh my God, hold on, I gotta get that in focus. That's amazing.
Hi, I'm John Sansis, better known as Jurassic John, and what we're looking at is a 1995 Jeep Wrangler done up like Jurassic Park. You know, for family and community, the thing about having a Jurassic Park Jeep is everybody loves it, and it's something that everybody can relate to. A lot of us have grown up with Jurassic Park and are fans of dinosaurs, even if you haven't watched the movies, so it's something for everybody.
Do the Alan Grant.
Yeah, do the, yeah.
No, I don't want to get it dirty. Yeah, Alan's Grand Raptor Claw.
Scares the kid with the attack doesn't come from the front, but from the side. So if you want to see more adventures or know where the Jurassic Park Jeep is going to be, follow us on Facebook or on Instagram.